Okay, let's get you all ready to do a great job on exam one. Again, just as a reminder, it's going to be 40 multiple choice questions, very heavy on the application. There's going to be several times during the review I'm just going to say you really have to understand this concept because I have several application questions that it's not a matter of knowing a definition or picking something off of a list, but you're going to have to apply it. Most of the questions were ones that came from the textbook publishers, so you've seen questions like them in the MindTap quizzes. On about, well, maybe 20% of the questions, I wrote them directly off of our class conversations. Remember that you can have a one-page cheat sheet. The only thing you can't do is reproduce any question bank questions on that. Also, each cheat sheet must be original. In other words, you can't task one person to make a cheat sheet for 4 other people. For those of you that are in class with me, I will be collecting your cheat sheets at the end. For those of you on Zoom or taking it, not Zoom, but taking it by Respondus Monitor, I want you to hold your cheat sheet up in front of the camera so I can get a close-up look at your cheat sheet. So no cheating with the cheat sheet. Okay, let's get into the review. I don't have it on the chart, but make sure that you know the fundamental question in strategy. These 4 definitions are pretty fundamental, so make sure that you understand them because these terms are used explicitly in several of the questions, and if you don't know what they're going to mean, you're not going to understand the question. Remember that it's analysis around LC's strategy, and the culminating point, or what it's all about, is performance, which is why the fundamental question of performance is why some firms outperform others. Make sure you know the difference between a vision and a mission statement, and specifically what would be good elements of a vision and mission statement. Nothing on any of these. Understand the concept of hyper competition and what contributes to that. And then there are about 3 questions where you are comparing or contrasting the IO, which is industrial organizational view of strategy, versus the resource-based view of strategy, or RBV. So you're going to need to understand these 2 concepts very well because there are several compare and contrast kinds of questions. We talked about Allegiant Airlines, but we talked about them specifically to introduce the concept of position, trade-off, and fit as a view of strategy. And then stakeholders. Understand who's in each group, understand what the groups typically desire, and understand how they sometimes have to be, the expectations of the group have to be managed. Nothing about strategic leaders and nothing about the devil wears Prada. So that's it for chapter 1. On to chapter 2. Understand that the environment often presents threats and opportunities, whereas resources tell you what you typically can do. As far as the external environment goes, make sure that you understand generally what fits into the different categories. There's going to be a question that's going to describe a scenario and ask you which category of general environment that we're talking about. But the majority of the questions for this chapter come from an application of Porter's 5 forces. So the best I can tell you is you really need to understand everything that's on all of these slides. If I had to go back and reread the textbook, I would definitely go back and reread everything on Porter's 5 forces because that is the great application principle for the chapter. Also, make sure that you understand the concept of complementors. Nothing on my war story. Strategic groups. Remember how we talked about this helps you figure out who is your competitor and who is not your competitor. And then there's going to be a question talking about competitive intelligence and competitor analysis and what sorts of moves are ethical or not. And there are no specific questions on forecasts. And then you're going to definitely want to be able to apply that concept in a question. That's it for chapter 2. In chapter 3, the fundamental big idea is the notion that resources and the way that firms combine those resources to generate core competencies is an answer to the question of why do some firms outperform others. And so this is focused on what can we do, although there's also the concept of weaknesses. We talk a lot about strengths because strengths can be combined into core competencies, but we talked about in class what to do with weaknesses, and I would be ready to think about the answer to that question. No specific question on that. Probably should have had a specific question on that. Talk about these three factors. Make sure that you understand them because that's what makes it so hard. And then make sure you understand what's a tangible resource, what's an intangible resource, kind of what goes with each of these. Not terribly hard. Frankly, if you just really understand the slide very well, you're going to be in good shape. Also, make sure that you could explain to me why intangible resources are typically seen as greater contributors to a competitive advantage. Understanding this chart and being able to apply this chart is going to be very important. Both understanding this idea of VRIN, no substitutes, although we'll talk about on the next slide. What do you get when you get the various things, and what is it that makes a core competency hard to imitate? If you remember, I talked about the fact that the guy that actually created this says he basically combines hard to imitate and no substitutes because they're kind of two sides of the same coin. And he introduces the concept that it's also how you organize to capitalize on these resources that is key. Value chain concept is very important, and really perhaps the greatest importance of understanding the value chain is how we practice it apply it in the Chapter 4 discussion, but you're going to want to understand this. And then outsourcing, there is a question about outsourcing and how we handle that. And then understand that this idea of the internal and external analysis, they help us figure out what opportunities there might be and what our strengths are and how we can form our strategy. So the outcome of this is basically the foundation of us making a strategy. And then we have some points to think about. And that is it for Chapter 3. In Chapter 4, it's important to understand the beginning of a strategy, that answering these questions are the beginning of the strategy, which is, this chart is the same basic way of asking those same questions. And then we got into the discussion of the different strategies. In preparation for the exam, what you need to be able to do is understand the strategy, what kinds of products, each type of strategy or products or services companies typically offer if they're going to employ that strategy. In other words, is it an on-par product or is it a differentiated product, and what are the ways to differentiate the product? There's no question that talks about my theory that it's really not these specific buckets, but it's more of a continuum, and you kind of get that by the broad scale of the integrated cost leadership. I won't get you to try to focus on focused cost versus focused differentiation. I just focus more on the fact that there is a focused strategy. So make sure that you can answer all of these questions to yourself so that you could explain a cost leadership strategy. Understand what is typically prioritized in a value chain by a firm employing the cost leadership. I'm not sure that that any questions draw directly off of this, but to the extent you understand that, you're going to do better. Likewise for differentiation. What is it that makes for a differentiated strategy? What does a differentiated strategy tend to emphasize in the value chain? Again, I can't think of a specific question that comes from this. Then understand that companies often focus and understand what can go wrong with a focus strategy, and then typically what are they doing to employ a focus strategy. And then the integrated cost leadership and differentiation strategy. I talked a lot about how it is a very strong position, but also hard to implement. So recognize what's happening with that. We had a great discussion in class from the grocery store wars. So I would review in my mind what I thought the strategy each of these firms was employing, and then what are some of the trade-offs that they have made to try to get into that position. Let's see if I've got all the questions. Yes, I have. Okay, so I guarantee you that I have covered every question on the exam. And when I say covered, I may have just said you need to understand this very well because there are a lot of application questions. So I've already told you how I would review for the exam, and I would certainly do that. But I want to emphasize a lot of application questions. So if you think you're going to sit there and power cram some definitions and you're going to do well on the exam, you're not. You're much better served by going back to the slides and asking, do I really understand this concept? Do I really understand Porter's five forces? Do I really understand the idea of resources leading to a competitive advantage? Do I really understand what the industrial organizational model says should be the path to prime profitability? So stick with that because you're going to be faced with a lot of questions that you're not going to be able to go to your cheat sheet and look up the answer. I guarantee you, you're not, because you're going to be applying the concepts. Therefore, take a step back. Don't get hung up on the specific terms so much. If you're fearful that you're not going to be able to know the difference between two terms, then put them on your cheat sheet as a crutch. But that's not typically what the question is going to turn on. So, good luck with the preparations, and I look forward to seeing you Monday morning. Don't forget, if you end up needing to use Respondus Monitor, that you must give a very thorough environment check. In other words, take that webcam and do like I'm doing now. You show me all the stuff that's on your desk. You show me everything that's around your desk. You show me the room. And don't spin it quite as fast as I'm spinning it. I want you to spin it slowly. I want you to show me the room and show me the whole environment so that I know that there's nobody else in that room with you. There's no notes that you're using that are helping you. You're not going to another source to get information, that I know it's just you answering those questions. Have a great weekend. Good luck.